A nation divided, the specter of segregation. The year is 1955. A young African-American girl approaches a water fountain. She is thirsty, parched under the sweltering southern sun. But a sign above the fountain stops her in her tracks. "Whites only," it reads. A stark reminder of the brutal reality of segregation that defined an era. This was Jim Crow America, a period in our nation's history where the law itself was contorted into a weapon, used to marginalize and oppress millions of African Americans. This essay delves into the heart of Jim Crow, exploring its origins, its devastating impact, and the unwavering spirit of those who fought tirelessly against its tyranny. It is a story of injustice and resilience, of oppression and the struggle for freedom, a story that continues to resonate deeply within the soul of America. From minstrel shows to malignant laws, the birth of Jim Crow. The term Jim Crow itself is a chilling reminder of the deep-seated racism that permeated American society. It originated in the early 19th century from minstrel shows, a form of popular entertainment where white performers donned blackface and mocked African Americans with exaggerated caricatures. These shows, rife with racist stereotypes, presented a distorted and demeaning image of black people, depicting them as lazy, ignorant, and subservient. The popularity of these minstrel shows, with their grotesque parodies of black life, helped to solidify racist attitudes in the minds of many white Americans. This toxic ideology seeped from the stage into the very fabric of society, paving the way for the systematic disenfranchisement of African Americans that would come to be known as Jim Crow. The rise of Jim Crow black codes, and the betrayal of Reconstruction. Following the Civil War and the abolition of slavery, a brief period of hope flickered for African Americans during Reconstruction. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution promised citizenship, equal protection under the law, and the right to vote for black men. However, this hope was soon met with fierce resistance in the South. White Southerners determined to maintain their dominance enacted black codes, a series of restrictive laws designed to limit the newly acquired freedoms of African Americans. These codes aimed to control black labor, restrict their movement, and deny them basic civil rights. The black codes were a precursor to Jim Crow, laying the groundwork for the systematic segregation and discrimination that would follow. Separate but unequal life under Jim Crow's oppressive rule. Jim Crow was more than just a set of laws, it was a way of life. From the cradle to the grave, African Americans faced relentless discrimination and segregation in every facet of their existence. Schools, hospitals, parks, even cemeteries were segregated. Black people were relegated to separate and inferior facilities, a constant and degrading reminder of their second-class status. The doctrine of separate but equal, sanctioned by the Supreme Court's infamous ruling in, provided a legal veneer for this institutionalized racism. However, the reality was far from equal. Black schools were chronically underfunded, hospitals lacked adequate resources, and public transportation for black people was often overcrowded and unreliable. The very air they breathed was thick with inequality. The scales of justice. Tip landmark Supreme Court cases. The Supreme Court, entrusted with upholding the Constitution and protecting the rights of all citizens, played a complex and often contradictory role in the Jim Crow era. In 1896, the court's decision in dealt a devastating blow to the fight for equality. By upholding the constitutionality of separate but equal facilities, the court legitimized segregation and emboldened white supremacists. However, the court's stance on segregation began to shift in the mid-20th century. In a series of landmark cases, culminating in the historic decision in 1954, the court began to chip away at the legal foundation of Jim Crow. The ruling, which declared state-sponsored segregation in public schools unconstitutional, was a watershed moment in the civil rights movement. The reign of terror, violence, and intimidation under Jim Crow. Jim Crow was maintained not only through legal machinations but also through brute force and terror. Lynching, a horrific form of vigilante violence, cast a long and terrifying shadow over black communities. Thousands of African Americans were lynched between the end of Reconstruction and the Civil Rights era, often on flimsy pretexts or mere accusations. The Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist terrorist organization, emerged as a powerful force for racial intimidation. Clad in hooded robes, KKK members terrorized black communities with impunity, burning crosses, bombing churches, and carrying out brutal acts of violence. The threat of violence hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the precariousness of black lives. Seeds of resistance. Challenging Jim Crow's authority. Despite the pervasive nature of Jim Crow and the constant threat of violence, African Americans never ceased resisting their oppression. They challenged segregation in courtrooms, organized boycotts and demonstrations, and built their own institutions to foster education, economic empowerment, and social progress. From the courageous activism of Ida B. Wells Barnett, who tirelessly exposed the horrors of lynching, to the legal brilliance of Charles Hamilton Houston, the architect of the NAACP's legal strategy, black leaders emerged to challenge the injustices of Jim Crow. These individuals, along with countless others who fought for equality, laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement that would transform America. The dawn of equality, dismantling Jim Crow. The mid-20th century witnessed the rise of the modern civil rights movement, a mass movement for social justice that shook the foundations of Jim Crow. Inspired by the nonviolent philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, civil rights activists, led by icons like Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and Fannie Lou Hamer, organized sit-ins, freedom rides, and marches that captured the nation's attention. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, landmark pieces of legislation passed in the wake of this movement, dealt a decisive blow to Jim Crow. These acts outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, effectively dismantling the legal framework of segregation. Jim Crow's shadow, a legacy of inequality. While the legal edifice of Jim Crow was dismantled in the 1960s, its legacy continues to cast a long shadow over American society. Decades of systemic racism and discrimination have left deep scars on our nation, manifested in persistent racial disparities in wealth, education, healthcare, and criminal justice. The fight for equality is far from over. As we grapple with the ongoing legacy of Jim Crow, it is imperative to remember the struggles and sacrifices of those who came before us. By confronting our history with honesty and courage, we can work towards a more just and equitable future for all Americans. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.